Obviously, one of the most important things you're dealing with when you're working as an artist is the element of line. And so I was going to talk a little bit about line and using line in your drawings. We're going to look at this fancy shoe here today, and also kind of talk about some of our pencil materials and that sort of thing. So we have different types of lines, and they can be, sort of what we think of as like a fast, what you would call like a gestural line of some sort, right? Kind of a fast line, right? We also have what you would consider to be a really slow and careful line, something that we're taking a lot of time to kind of make sure it's what it looks like. We're kind of slowing down a little bit. A slow line, you can tell that that line is way different than what this line looks like, right? We also have, what you could say is like a broken line. And so you could, for example, you don't have to keep your contour line, which is what this is. This is called contour line. This is like the outside edge of an object. So I'm drawing this thing over here. Your contour line is your outside edge. So when someone says draw this pencil sharpener, you're drawing, usually people will draw like the basic shape of that object and using some sort of line. And so this type of a line is faster, right, than this is, like kind of a careful, slow line right here, right? You can also have, what I would call a fuzzy line. So if you're kind of less confident with your line making, you might, instead of, just kind of going for it like this, you might kind of sit around and go, okay, well, it looks sort of like this. And this is okay. I kind of think this line is like this. It's sort of this. Okay, and then if you do this, this is what I would call the caterpillar line, because it's fuzzy, like a fuzzy line. This type of a line, this type of a contour line, looks a little bit timid. And it's okay if that's what you do, but I would encourage you to try to speed up your line a little bit. And this is all right, but it looks a little bit like you're not very confident. Okay, so if you're going to draw this thing, I would just go for it. So you can think about it. It doesn't mean you don't have to go over it again, or that you're not going to go over it again, but thinking a little bit more confidently about your line and kind of making it like one long gesture, as opposed to like a really fuzzy one. So if you do that, that's just something, a good tip to have. So keep that in mind as you're working. You can also have really light lines, right? You can have a real light line. This is a 6B pencil, and I can go anywhere from a really, really light line to a medium valued line to a really dark line, depending on the pressure that I have here. And like I'd sort of mentioned before, your pencil set that you have, you probably have a couple different types. And on the top of your pencil, it's going to say, that you're using what's called a 2B or a 6B. And the bigger the number is, the softer it's going to be, the graphite, right? So 4B is kind of like the one in the middle. So if you're making, if you want to get a pretty solid range of value, 4B is kind of the way to go. But I really like 6B too. So this is 4B, and then this is 6B. But you might like a lot of different types of things. I just sort of like a darker line myself. So so you can have, light lines or dark lines. You can also have thin lines and then thick lines. And, you can do that in one kind of go, right? If you try this. And I would suggest that you guys get your pencil sets out and try this, right? You can make it a thin line and kind of roll it so it's thicker, right? Or roll it up on the edge of that material, depending on what you're using. You can see that a little more maybe with a different type of a pencil of some sort. This is a charcoal pencil, right? Right, thick line, thin line. And of course, if you're using some sort of a material that is, that you're holding by hand, sort of like a piece of charcoal, you can go from a really thin line edge to a thicker edge, sort of. So, but we're just kind of talking about pencil sets today. So you have your thin line, your thick line, and you have your light line and your dark line. Now everybody's sort of different in what they like to have, but I sort of tend to be a heavy-handed drawer, so I know this about myself, and you probably know whether or not you are kind of a heavy-handed drawer, you make lines really dark, or if you're kind of a lighter hand drawer, if you make them really light. So if you know that about yourself, you can challenge yourself to make it so that you have a wider variety of your lines. So instead of having a drawing where everything is exactly the same line weight, which is to say the same heavy or lightness or thick or thinness of your drawing, what you want to shoot for is something that has a variety of line weight. So line weight is a good, like a variety of line weight, just because it kind of makes your drawing more interesting to look at, and it's a little bit more elaborate, because let's face it, a basic line drawing is maybe not the most exciting thing to look at. I mean, I like line drawing, so you know, but you can really make it pop if you have a range of value and a range of line weight. And by value, that doesn't mean you made a value scale necessarily. If you're working with line, you guys know what a value scale is at this point, right? That's when you've got, like, you know, it's really dark over here, it's white over here, and this gets progressively lighter. If you think about it though, you can also have your lines be this way, right? So you can have, you know, no line, a barely there line, a little bit more line, a little bit darker line, and then you have a real dark line, right? So if you can see that there, that's something to think about when you're drawing, because it just gives you a little bit more punch. So if I'm going to draw my shoe out here, right? Hello, shoe. I'm going to put this out here. Let's see. And I'm not going to think about my line weight first. I'm just going to think about my contour line, and I actually am going to use a little bit of a lighter pencil for this particular section. So I think I'm going to use a 2B here. So a 2B pencil is pretty good because it's not a real dark one, and if you tend to be kind of a heavy-handed drawer to start with, it might be good to start with a little bit of a lighter valued graphite. Okay, so when I start working over here on my shoe, and you know, this takes a lot of practice too, so if you don't get it right on the first time, it's not a big deal. So I'm going to kind of start with a real light line to begin with, and this is a contour line. So let's see. I'm not sure if you guys can see this, but I'm just going to start with a contour line. And the best thing about drawing a shoe, and this is what I would suggest for you, is starting with a pair of shoes, is that shoes, they never are like, oh, that doesn't look like me, right? Because when you try to draw your friends, they always go, oh, that doesn't look like my face, or whatever. But shoes, they always end up looking like some sort of a shoe, or recognizable at least as a shoe. So that's sort of why I like drawing them, is because they're not quite as difficult for one. So now I'm working up onto the top of my pump up here, and let's see, there's a few other details. So when you're working on yours, you want to think about some of the details that makes your shoe look like your actual shoe. And I'm gonna have to get my eraser here. You can use a whatever eraser you have. I'm just gonna use this one because I have it here. But I'm gonna extend this up just a little bit more. So when I'm working on this, I want to keep kind of a light touch with my graphite. So I don't want to make it too dark yet, because it's not, I'm just kind of sketching it out to start with. So I don't want to make it too dark. And I would suggest that you don't either, actually. But it's starting to look like a shoe, right? I know this is really basic for a lot of people, but I think knowing some of these basic ideas, right, it's like thinking about contour line is really helpful, especially if the only thing you've ever drawn with is contour line, which is what most people have only drawn with. So I'm looking at some of my little details, but one of the things about doing details too is that you don't want to put so many details in that at the beginning that you lose sight of your whole structure of your object. So instead of doing, you know, writing out the words and stuff on my brand of shoe here, I'm going to leave that for the last, like for a little bit later. So, but I am going to draw kind of these big basic shapes to start with. And I usually think about drawing objects or even drawing people's face or anything like that as kind of just lots of shapes sort of put together, which I know is not how everyone thinks about that. But you'll see that I'm kind of working, like kind of going around all these different spaces to sort of figure out how to do this here. I'll come back and do more details later if I want to, but I think I'm just going to kind of sit with this to begin. Right, so now we have a kind of a basic sense of that shoe with that contour line there. Okay, so as we're looking at it now, this isn't a very elaborate shoe yet because it only has sort of like one type of line weight going on here. Actually, I'm going to erase this part here because it goes in front of the rest of it. So there, it looks pretty good. Okay, so now you can take, this was a 2B, right? You can take your, maybe say a 6B or a 4B. I think I'm going to use a 4B. And make sure that you sharpen your pencil so that it's not dull all the time, because you can get more variety in your line weight if you do this. But now I'm going to start thinking about like where are the light and the dark spaces just in my shoe. Now this doesn't mean that you're going to be shading your shoe, because even though I'm drawing like a fancy metallic shoe, I'm not going to shade it because I'm trying to make a line drawing as opposed to a full shade, like shaded chiaroscuro drawing. So that's not what I want you to do today, but you can kind of play around just with the thickness and thinness of the line to start with. So I always think about you know, where my light's coming from, especially no matter what kind of drawing I'm doing. So I know, because I have this desk lamp here, that my light is coming from this side. So you'll see this a lot. Like this is not, you know how little kids draw the sun? Like don't ever draw your sun like this unless you're making a kid's card, right? It looks kind of like a squished spider, but your light is going to be up here. Well, this is going to be our sun. Okay. So it's funny, but you want to think about where the light's coming from. So if it's coming from this side, that means that this side of like your strap is going to be a little bit darker. So I'm going to darken up the edge of this a little bit, and anything else that's on that side of things. So actually like my heel here is going to be darker too. I'm just going to darken it up. And I'm going to try to avoid the caterpillar line in particular, if I can. And if I need to stop and kind of pull that back up again, I can. I'm also going to put the kind of the edge of this heel down here, make it a little bit darker there. I also know that because the light is above this, that this space underneath is going to be a little bit darker too. So I'm going to darken that up. And then I'm going to let it get kind of lighter up here, because I know the light is going to be hitting this line up here. And so it's going to give it a little more dimension or dimensionality. So actually I think I'm going to darken this side up too. And make this a little bit darker and maybe a little bit of a thicker line, especially the lines that are touching, say, your tabletop. So if you have a shoe on a tabletop, which I do, you might think about that. So I have this sort of line going on here. I might actually make that a little bit darker. And then definitely the underside of all of these shoes is that I'm going to really darken up this space underneath here, because I know that it's the bottom edge of this shoe space. Okay. Maybe I'll do right here too a little bit. Okay, so I've kind of got a little bit more variety. So you'll see on the top here, it's really light. And I can kind of take these and make these a little bit crisper if I want to now. I don't usually use a mechanical pencil, but it makes kind of a nice skinny line. So I'm going to do that up here. Oop. Just to make it kind of thin. You don't want to use maybe just one type of pencil, so you can definitely switch it up a little bit, and I really like that because then you get even more variety in your line, because of the switch in what you're using, like materials wise. So I'm trying to avoid some of that fuzzy line there. Okay, that's looking pretty good. And definitely I'm going to do the front part of the shoe and the toe, like underneath it. Make sure of it. It's looking pretty good there. And I think I'm going to also run this line over the top a little bit darker. Kind of a medium value line here, actually. And then I'm going to darken this space up in here too, because it's underneath this space and it's going to be kind of facing away from where the light is. So I'm going to run this line up here, and it's going to be a little bit on the darker side. So then you're kind of working with your line weight, and now you've got a really interesting drawing going, because you have a light line, sort of a medium line, and then you have a really dark line, actually. So that's kind of what you're going to be doing with thinking about range of line weight with your contour line.